you found out on that presentation, you know very well that access and use of postnatal care in sub-Saharan Africa is limited. The lack of clearly defined content and timing of postnatal services contributes to discontinuity between services received during pregnancy and delivery and affects the linkages to other key services for new mothers, including family planning and HIV prevention services. So as we look at Dr. James Kimani's data, then we will be able to see how we get there is their impact. The next presentation will be in two parts. I'm glad it's going to be done by master students. As you know very well, in research you want to nurture people who will eventually take over from you and do good research better than you. On the podium now is Avery White. She is a master's student in reproductive health in the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. She'll present the first part of the presentation. The title is The Effect of Family Planning and HIV Service Integration on unmet need for family planning, HIV STI protection. Yeah.
Thank you. So this analysis uses Okay, so this analysis uses data from the Kenya cohort. The methods were discussed before for the study design. The data was collected in 4 rounds, but this analysis will be using data from only round 0, which is the recruitment, and round 1, which is 6 months after recruitment. So it's looking at the short-term effects of the intervention. The aims of this analysis are to understand unmet need for family planning and HIV/STI protection in the cohort, and to assess the short-term effect of the Integra intervention on these unmet need outcomes. So there is a standard indicator for unmet need for family planning. Just summarizing it here because I adapted it slightly for this analysis. It includes sexually active pregnant women who are currently pregnant within this time or unwanted pregnancy, and sexually active women who are not sure whether they want their children, whether they want more children in more than 2 years, or want no more children at all, and do not use water contraceptives or consistent condoms. And there is no standard indicator for unmet need for HIV and STI protection. So I adopted one that was used for a previous analysis of some data. In this analysis, unmet need for HIV and STI protection includes all sexually active women who are at risk for HIV or STI transmission, infection, or reinfection who did not consistently use condoms. Consistent condom use was defined as was measured as use at last sex with every sexual partner in the last 1 month. And those at risk for HIV and STIs were those who are HIV positive, did not know their own HIV status, did not know their partner's HIV status, had an STI, had more than 1 sexual partner, knew or were not sure if their partner had other partners. So you can see here in the first graph that unmet need for family planning is generally very low in this cohort. The round 0 sample size was 1,959, and round 1 was 1,452. So it's under 10% in both intervention and comparison in both rounds. It's 2% higher in intervention facilities in both rounds, and it decreases during that 6-month period between rounds, but this decrease is not significant. Now, unmet need for HIV and STI protection is much higher. In round 0, at recruitment, it was around 50%, and in round 1, it increased to around 60%. It's higher in comparison facilities in both rounds, and between round 0 and round 1, unmet need for HIV and STI protection increases significantly in both design groups. Unmet need for HIV and STI protection increases more in intervention facilities in comparison facilities between rounds. Now, I'm not sure how much of this you can really see, but basically it's a distribution of the unmet need outcomes across client characteristics. So just to summarize, for unmet need for family family planning, there is an increase of age among unmarried clients, among clients with lower levels of education, lower levels of socioeconomic status, among clients who have more than one sexual partner or whose partner had more than one partner, and those who had more children or more pregnancies, had experienced a child's death, and among HIV-positive clients. Unmet need for HIV and STI protection increased among clients aged 30 to 34 and decreased with older ages. It increased among married clients and single clients, and with higher and lower levels of education and higher and lower levels of socioeconomic status. Also, there was an increase among clients with more than one partner and whose partner had more than one partner, who had more pregnancies and more children, and those who had experienced a child's death. And unmet need for HIV and STI protection increased among HIV-negative clients. So now this is the results from the multivariable analysis for unmet need for family planning. The odds ratios are adjusted for all the other variables shown in this chart and also for within facility clustering. This is the odds for unmet need for family planning at round 1, about 6 months after recruitment. So you can see at the top that there is no significant difference in the odds of unmet need for family planning by Integra study design group. In intervention facilities, there is not evidence of an increase in odds for unmet need for family planning. And then I'm quickly going to point out a few more of the results that don't cover the null value of 1, indicating a significant difference when controlling for responders. And that is clients who have incomplete secondary school compared to those in primary school, and among HIV-positive clients compared to HIV-negative clients, actually had 28 times the odds for unmet need for family planning. And so this is the same thing, but now for unmet need for HIV and STI protection. At the top of the chart, you can see that the confidence interval just barely crosses 1. There is insufficient evidence of the odds of unmet need for HIV and STI protection is lower at intervention facilities in comparison to facilities at round 1. Looking at other confidence intervals, you can see that there is a significant increase in the odds of unmet need for HIV and STI protection among clients who had that need at round 0. So if they had it at recruitment, they were also very likely to have it at round 1, 6 months later. The most striking difference in the odds of HIV and STI protection was by HIV status. So there was about 50% less the odds of the outcome in HIV-negative clients. So just to conclude, there were a few limitations in the study. First of all, the definition of outcome variables. Condom use at last sex may not be the most accurate way to measure consistent condom use, and the median period of 1 month may not give the best picture of consistent condom use. And the survey was a bit underpowered to detect differences in unmet need outcomes by subgroups, particularly by HIV status, which showed some interesting results. So in conclusion, unmet need for family planning decreased not significantly between round 0 and round 1, but a similar decrease was shown in both intervention and comparison facilities. Also, unmet need for HIV and STI protection increased significantly during the 6-month period between rounds, and unmet need outcomes differed markedly by HIV status. However, the Integra intervention did not affect either unmet need outcome in the short term. So the next steps are to explore these findings in more detail in order to understand the absence of the effect at 6 months, as well as analyzing the longer-term effects of the Integra intervention at 1 year and 2-year follow-up.
Thank you very much. Can we give her a more loud applause on that? I hope you're still awake. The CCTV camera is rolling. And we have said it will determine, using a scoring system, the participant who has slept the most. And we'll give that participant the opportunity to ask the first question. So, next, going to give the second part of that presentation given by Ray. The title is Links Between Fertility Intentions, Family Planning, Use and HIV Status Among Postpartum Women in Swaziland. Michelle.
Thank you for that introduction. So, as mentioned, I'm looking at the results from the Swaziland cohort that was described earlier. The study objectives were twofold. They were to assess the difference between HIV positive and HIV negative postpartum women with regards to fertility intentions, which were defined as a woman self-identifying as intending on getting pregnant with another child, as well as family planning service use, which was defined when needed by contraceptive use. These behaviors were analyzed over time after recruitment, which was from 0 to 10 weeks postpartum, round 1, which was 6 months, and at 1 year follow-up. The fourth round, or I guess round, follow-up at 2nd year wasn't available for this analysis. As mentioned before, the cohort methods were described earlier, but a couple things to note. The cohort included 1,098 women, but at least 29 did not or could not disclose their HIV status, so they were excluded from this analysis. So we only people who could identify as either HIV positive or HIV negative. Okay, so this slide shows the unadjusted proportions of women who indicated that they wanted to have another child. As you can see, at baseline, HIV positive women are much less likely to intend to have another child. And this doesn't seem to change too much over time, which is a slight decline. In contrast, HIV negative women, which are in green here, at baseline have much higher fertility intentions, but this intention decreases much more rapidly over time. And by 1 year postpartum, there doesn't seem to be a whole lot of difference. And then after adjusting for a number of factors, confounders, as well as accounting for clustering, to explain this graph, one would be if the two groups, HIV positive and negative, were quite similar. So anything below 1 is HIV positive women having lower intentions, and anything above would be higher. So you can see that overall, throughout the 1 year, throughout the 3 rounds, HIV positive women have approximately half the odds of fertility intentions that HIV negative women do. But if you look at that overall and split it up by round, it's clearly a trend over time. So you can see that at recruitment at the baseline, 0 to 10 weeks postpartum, it's much stronger fertility, lower fertility intentions for HIV positive women, and this trend decreases over time towards the null value, with HIV positive and HIV negative women becoming more similar, which makes sense based on the conclusions from the unadjusted proportions of women shown in the previous slide. Additionally, I could look at the differences between intervention and comparison sites, but there didn't seem to be any statistically significant difference. So this slide shows, again, unadjusted proportions of women who indicated that they were using a method of family planning. You can see that there's very low family planning use at baseline, which is not entirely unsurprising because that is 0 to 10 weeks postpartum, and many women may not have received sex or may not be thinking of it yet. But then there does tend to be good uptake by 6 months and 1 year postpartum, with a few differences between HIV positive and HIV negative women. However, these results are unadjusted, so after adjusting for factors and accounting for clustering, we get some more interesting results over time. So you can see that overall, HIV positive women tend to have lower odds of family planning use, but when looking over time, that seems to be the case at baseline, but by 6 months, HIV positive women have much quicker uptake at nearly 3 times the odds of uptake at 6 months, and by 1 year postpartum, the two groups are very similar. And again, there didn't seem to be much of a significant difference by site destination. And it's, I guess the overall results there are probably biased by the strong baseline. So overall, I think the message to take home from this analysis is that HIV
HIV-positive women tend to know earlier postpartum that they don't want, or they don't intend to have more children, and it doesn't seem to change too much over time. And yet they seem to be less likely to be using family planning or accessing family planning during that quite early postpartum period. So that may be a good area to target during integration programs that serve the needs of both HIV-positive and HIV-negative women to give them access to family planning as early as possible.
Thank you very much, Michelle, for that presentation. The lights have been dimmed a bit, but it's because we want to see the slides better, not that we go to sleep. Do not confuse the message. Keep awake, please. Our next presenter is Joelle Mak. Joelle Mak is a research fellow in the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine. She is going to give a talk, presentation, or asking the question, are integrated services meeting reproductive and HIV needs in Kenya and Swaziland? The background of this is that we know little is known about whether integrated services are better able to meet SRH needs at a population level. This study is seeking to identify the extent to which integrated services were able to meet sexual and reproductive health needs and to identify missed opportunities for service promotion. So keep that in mind as you look at the slides. Though they might be complex, but it's to try to keep you awake. Joelle, please.
Good afternoon. So, just briefly, the aims of this analysis is to determine the level of need for family planning services and for HIV services at the population level, and look at how these were met or unmet, and also to assess the demand for integrated services among SRH service users. So the methods, here we use a community survey. This is household surveys, which were done, it's a 3-stage cluster survey where one respondent per household was randomly selected to respond. And I should say that they were interviewed and the data were collected by using PDAs. These were done in 2009 in 2 sites in Kenya, in Nyahururu and Tita, and in Manzini in Swaziland. I should also add that this analysis is exploratory, so this is okay, so firstly, I'll just define for you what we mean when we say need for family planning services and need for HIV services. So for family planning services, we define this as respondents who are sexually active and fecund and who either don't want children in the next year or they report that they would be unhappy if they found out they were pregnant tomorrow. And this need for family planning services we consider met if they report doing something or using something with all of their sexual partners to prevent pregnancy, or if they report using condoms at last sex, again with all of their sexual partners. Need for HIV services we define as sexually active men and women who either have more than one sexual partner or they have never been tested for HIV. And then again, this need was considered met if they reported condom use with all of their partners at last sex, and if they reported ever having had an HIV test. Demand for integrated SRH services. So I should first say that for the community survey, we looked at 5 specific services that we call SRH services, and these are family planning, maternal health, HIV testing, care and treatment, STI services, and also male circumcision. So we assessed demand by asking respondents what other services they wanted at their last clinical visit. So the results. So firstly, I present the result for all respondents, and then we'll look at only the respondents who reported having used an SRH service. So the demographic profile. So after we adjusted for clustering, in Kenya we had a sample size of about 1,700, and in Swaziland it was about 800. Kenya there was slightly more women, just over 1,000 compared to 700 men, and in Swaziland it was pretty balanced, just under 400 each. for men and women. So across the board, the largest proportion of the respondents came from the under 25 age group. And in Kenya, they were largely married or in cohabiting relationships, whereas in Swaziland, they were more likely, or not more likely, they were more reported to have been in non-cohabiting partnerships. Education was also a little bit different. In Kenya, just over half of the women reported having none or only primary level of education. There were more men reporting having had secondary school. Swaziland, for both men and women, the majority had secondary, some form of secondary school education. So what is the level of need for services, for family planning services and HIV services amongst all respondents again? And how are these met? So looking at the need for family planning services first on the left side, the blue is where respondents have a need for services, and the red is where they have no need for services. So we can see across both countries and both men and women, the blue for family planning services, that's where the majority falls. So the majority of our respondents at population level did have a need for family planning services. For HIV services, they look quite different. So we see, again, across both countries, it was much lower. About 1/5 of women in both countries had a need for HIV services, and for men, it was the majority, over half. And then we're going to look at how these were met. So firstly, we'll look at family planning services. So I'll try to talk through this slide. There's a lot going on here. So in the blue columns, that's where the needs are met. So again, just to reiterate that we define these needs as being met if they reported using something or doing something with all of their sexual partners, or they reported condom use at last sex with all partners. So we see almost 80% across the board in both countries have their needs met. But how are these needs actually met? So this is the red bar. So we see that it's mostly client-driven, and by client-driven we mean that these are respondents who reported having been to an SRH service specifically for FP, so they went and got that service. There's a little green bar underneath that it's very minimal, so you don't really see it. Sort of under 1%, again, across the board. Thank you. These are provider-driven, so these are respondents who reported having been to an SRH service, not specifically for FP, but they did receive FP service, so provider-driven. In the unmet need, the next column, those bars, brown one shows that these are unmet, the total proportion unmet. And we see that the light blue is a non-service user, so these are people who in the last 12 months have not been anywhere for any SRH services. And in the purple, these are missed opportunities. So these are where respondents have been somewhere for SRH, again not specifically for FP, but did not have their FP needs met. For HIV services, I'm only presenting the unmet need for HIV services because the met were very, very low. You see in the brown on the top, you see over 90% across the board did not have their HIV service needs met. And again, that's largely due to not having been anywhere for any SRH services. Although there was a sizable portion in purple that were missed opportunities. Again, providers not taking advantage of the fact that respondents did show up for a facility to address other health needs. So quickly look at the demand. So demand for integrated services, we only looked at the most recent clinical SRH visit. And the blue indicates that respondents reported wanting one service, only one service. And the red is where they wanted more than one service. So we see across all of the different types of services, and for men and women in both countries, most people only wanted one service. So a smaller proportion in red wanted more than one. And these were more likely to be women. And here I'm showing the balance of demand and receipts, just purely based on numbers. So if a respondent said they wanted 2 services, what number of services did they actually receive? So if this was equal, this is the blue. So if they wanted 2 and they got 2, that's blue. And the red is where they received more services, again, quantity, number of services, than they demanded. And the dark blue on the bottom, this is where they received fewer services than they demanded. So again, most people got what they wanted, but in terms of numbers. So to conclude, we found at the population level that the need for family planning services is high in both countries, although this was largely met. need for HIV services is higher among men and lower among women, but there were low levels of service utilization, particularly amongst those with a need for HIV services. There were high levels of missed opportunities for providers to address clients' other SRH needs when they do actually present to the facility. Demand for and receipt of integrated services among service users across all 5 services were extremely low. And so we think that there should be more, we should look more into strategies to improve SRH service uptake at the population level, and also to explore the reasons behind this low demand and receipt of integrated services. So on behalf of the team, I'd like to just acknowledge that the Integra initiative is supported by the Gates Foundation and in partnership with the Ministries of Health in Swaziland, Kenya, and Malawi. And we would like to thank all the men and women who took part in the study. And that's our website. We do actually have 2 other presentations on Integra after this, so if you're interested, you can stay on.
Thank you very much, Joelle. Could we give a loud applause, please? Thank you very much.